Hi, and welcome to the Road to Sustainability podcast. Today I have the real pleasure to host Rita Kakati-Shah. Rita is an award-winning gender diversity, inclusion, and career strategist, speaker, author, and advisor. Rita is the founder and CEO of UMA, empowering confidence, success, and resilience in women and minorities. Hi Rita, how are you?
Good, thank you, Yael. How are you?
I'm very good. I'm super excited to have you. Would you like, please, to tell us a bit about your background?
Yeah, so I'm a girl from London originally, born and brought up in the UK. My family are from Assam, which is in the northeast of India. So they moved to the UK many, many years ago. So my younger brother and I we were born in the UK, born and brought up there. I studied, my education was in London, then I started my career in investment banking. I was in the very male-dominated industry of being on the trading floor for the first decade of my life, my professional life. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I had early morning starts, but we would be off sort of in the afternoon when the markets closed. I enjoyed it. I had a fantastic time. That's how I got really exposed to diversity and inclusion work here for the first time. This is in the early 2000s, so this was even before it was officially called diversity and inclusion, but I was one of very few women on the trading floor. So that in itself was my first journey of where are the other women? I know they're in the firm, I know they exist. How do we get everyone together? How do we get people to come together and sort of, so I can see professionally what they do, and similarly, I would love them to see a little bit of the work I do as well. So it started from that, soon moved on to, for the women's side of things, to things like setting up an Asian professionals network, where there were definitely people from different parts of the world, but they would be a little bit in stereotypical roles. For example, if I looked to the technology desk, I would say a majority of the team members were male Indian on the tech desk, for example. Whereas if I looked to the Latin American desk, there would be mostly people from the Latin American countries on that desk. I had just come back from a backpacking trip in Guatemala. I would love the chance to practice my Spanish a bit and get on there, but it was harder to do that. So that was part of how I got involved in diversity and inclusion, very just naturally by just different life circumstances and trying to make the workplace a better environment. That's how that journey started. I transitioned careers into the pharmaceutical industry after my decade at Goldman in London. And that for me was another beautiful journey. I was in business development, meaning I got to travel here, there, and everywhere to lots of different countries around the world, and to meet thought leaders really in psychiatry and neurology, so really on the leading forefront of clinical trials and drug development. I was traveling everywhere. Part of those travels brought me to New York, which is where I now live and which is where I'm dialing in from today, and I settled here. And I have two small children now, who are now 6 and 8, so time does fly, I have to say. But when they were very young, I took around 3.5, almost 4 years off, exclusively to raise them. And I've got to tell you, out of all of the many, many roles I have done, by far the toughest, the most challenging was the role of being a full-time mother. You know, you're not just working 24/7, but you are working 24/7 without a break. You're constantly sleep deprived. You can never take a sick day. You are always on call. You are always balancing so much. So it taught me so much, not just about my fellow network of new friends, mothers, but also I respect my own mother a lot more as well and realized what that journey entailed. But I also realized, Yale, that there were so many skills you pick up that are actually completely transferable and make the workforce a better place. Communications, empathy, the art of listening. I tell people all the time, negotiations. You can negotiate with a toddler or an adolescent. There isn't anyone on this planet you can't take on. So things like that taught me so much about myself. And yet, when I was ready to revisit the professional paid workforce again, nobody once asked me about my credentials and what I could bring back to the workforce. The questions were completely fixated around that proverbial gap on my resume. So that's really where the journey of UMA started, a company that I helm, that I founded in response to my personal story, in response to all of the hundreds and thousands of women around the world and other minority groups that have faced that issue of confidence, that issue of self-doubt, but have so much to offer in their lives, in their work, everywhere really. So it's really a platform that I started to really create confidence, unshakable confidence, success stories, whether in work or personal life, building resilience and leadership specifically in women and other minority groups. So that's a that's a nutshell of the work I do and why I do it. I absolutely loved it. It's very focused on coaching and very focused on diversity inclusion as well.
Well, Rita, first of all, thank you. Your enthusiasm is so contagious. And thank you for that. Tell us a bit about Uma.
So I call Uma the goddess of go-getting because in Hinduism, Uma is a goddess. She is a mother, she is a daughter, she is a sibling, she is a wife. So she really depicts so many of the roles that we as women or men face at some point in our lives. It's very, very much a journey of confidence, one of determination and full of courage. So not only was it a short and sweet name, but it's very, very meaningful as well. I love telling people all the time, when you're building up that confidence, really think about that goddess of go-getting that lives inside all of you. So really, Uma is that journey, it's that platform that really helps you on your journey, on your personal life, really to build that inner voice that we all have to kind of strengthen us to go forth in directions, in life, in work, in whatever way we want to.
I love it. I can't wait, to see and visit. And you mentioned that as a mother, you learned so much, and you achieved a point that, in terms of reflection and in terms of sharing and in terms of pushing away the boundaries, do you think that this is the next step for any women that wants to lead or to get some executive position? What's your take on that, on how today we see the world?
Yeah, that's a great question, Yael. So here's the thing, we're obviously hit by a global pandemic at the moment, and it was shown during the pandemic. There was a study done by McKinsey in collaboration with a leading organization in the States, and they showed that during the pandemic, 1 in 4 women actually left the workforce due to burnout. And the reasons for that burnout was due to having extra household responsibilities. Now remember, these are men and women both working from home. Almost overnight, we all had to switch from being in the office to remote working. And yet, 1 in 4 women are feeling that extra burden on themselves, whether it's extra household chores, whether it's extra responsibilities, whether it's homeschooling children, like in my case. And that is extra work that we are taking upon ourselves. It's not that the men don't do it. There's a certain way of doing it and timeliness that you think, okay, the kids have a certain schedule, but it needs to be done now. So a lot of the time that we as women, we put that pressure on ourselves because we are forced to in so many ways. And unfortunately, the workforce isn't geared towards helping that balance. Whereas there is a lot more equality in different ways. There's more leave available. There is a lot more understanding when men want to take a bit of leave as well. The balance of care, that duty, that burden still falls mostly on the women. Unfortunately, if that doesn't get resolved, unless there is more equality there, it's very difficult to really think about how in a long-term basis we can actually flourish. Most women can flourish after the medium or the early senior leadership ranks in the workforce.
What would you say to a government representative today, in terms of policies and responsibilities that they should take right now?
That's, again, a great question. So I would, again, state data that exists. So McKinsey did another study that shows that if women were given the equal opportunity to men, and that would mean that as much as 26% or $28 trillion could, in theory, be added to the global annual GDP by the year 2025. If nothing speaks louder than that, I don't know what does. So that in itself is a way of motivating policy makers, governments, individuals, corporations to think we need to do something about this because this only betters society as a whole. That isn't done right now. So I think a lot of it isn't just, let's point the finger at the corporate people. The responsibility lies with everybody, the educational institutions, government, policymakers, also societies, us, conversations we have at home. Things like, generally women do take on more of the caring responsibility at home. More of the, I'm going to, days ended, I'm going to cook, I'm going to clean, whatever it is. How about let's try to share that responsibility out a little bit amongst ourselves, to kind of share it out. So, okay, I'm going to do this, why don't you do that? And share it out with whoever's in the household, whether it's your children, whether it's your, spouse, your partner, whoever it is, because that is how you can in real life start to make change happen by action, not just words. So similarly, in a different scale to that, if you extend that with other things, practice it, action by doing things slowly, one person at a time, one step at a time, we can start making change happen.
Thank you for this amazing response. I'll tell you, I'm the fortunate chair of the IEEE Standards Wellbeing Initiative. And you mentioned the GDP earlier.
Yeah.
We're really working really hard in terms of suggestions and frameworks, and we're trying somehow to find a way to deploy those frameworks, including the policies, including the recommendations. And the well-being, as for any other framework, but I'm going to emphasize on the well-being because that's really perfectly spotted in terms of balance and in terms of sharing and communication. I think there are several aspects that you mentioned here. That first is the message that you're providing at home from the very beginning. It's more about a culture. It's more about some have religious aspects, some other have traditional aspects, and the work comes from the bottom up. On the other side, we have the corporates and we have the capital markets overall that are somehow leading and deciding for us as employees or as partners. And the decisions come too often from the top down, with leadership that are not always supporting diversity on the proper way, equality, and sending and sharing the right messages. You mentioned that you're taking the lead at home. How about suggesting that the home work that you do, that you lead, should be taught or should be shared with the men and on the opposite side?
And that's exactly what I'm talking about. So, for example, in our situation at home, I live at home. My husband is there, and I have 2 children, a boy and a girl. They're 6 and they're 8. We all share out the responsibility. We all help each other. We take turns. So even when we're at the table, okay, say I brought the food out, okay, it's their turn to take the dishes to the kitchen. They're at that age now where they love getting responsibility. They love being given grown-up chores to do. So this is the perfect way to educate them in sharing that responsibility. It's not that my girl gets to do something or my boy gets to do something else. They both do it together. So one day, if one of them helps put the laundry in, the other one will help take it out and put it in the dryer. They will wash and fold together. And this lesson starts now. Not only does it show them that there is no gender difference in who does what, but it also gives them a responsibility, a sense of independence and learning that every task that we do at home is a valuable task. You don't ever look up or down on somebody because of the type of job they do, because they're doing everything from now. One of them makes a mess in the bathroom, they're going to help clean it up so they understand what goes into that process. And that journey, that level starts now. And I think that's exactly to your point, Yael. It's about practicing what you preach. It's great that, I might go out there and give these speeches about how can we do that, but I'm going to do it from home as well, otherwise nothing changes. Similarly, each of us, every single policymaker, all of these senior CEOs out there that are also giving these similar messages need to be doing this in their same homes as well.
Awesome. And I'm really realistic that it's going to take a while, and unfortunately we're going to have a lot of work. We as women, first of all, as leaders, and also as mothers, and I'm unfortunately not that optimistic when I see the numbers of 23% of executive roles that are held by women, actually, especially in the tech industry where I'm involving, but also in the healthcare and the fintech. And what do you think about how do you see the future?
So I think there's a couple of things. It's about getting these women in these roles in the first place. Now, if you think about it, more than 50% of graduates are female. So in terms of grades, study, academics, women are actually doing better than men. So they all go in at the ground level together, slightly more women than men. And slowly now, slightly more women are starting to go more into the STEM roles as well. And once they're in, what is to try and help them stay there? And that's the point. Unless these corporates do a slightly better job, unless something is done to make it easier for them to excel and grow in these roles, that 23% is going to stay at that 20%, 23%, and even decline as the ranks go up. And that is something that needs to change. One of that is pay equity, for example. We've known for years now that gender pay isn't necessarily equal, depending on who you speak to about it. But, according to the Global Institute of Women's Leadership at King's College London, it could take up to 200 years to get pay equity. And that is really not a great statistic to have out there. So, things like that isn't always great. Hours can be longer as well in the tech industry. And unless there's that shared responsibility amongst everything at home, nothing's going to change. So I think, unfortunately, that is a dire statistic. And unless things are done from a corporate perspective, from a society, from a perspective all around, it's going to take a long time to change that.
Another point that is related to what you said, do you think that we are somehow incompetent in terms of leadership, or pushing the barriers, or there is something in us as women that we missed, or something that we cannot do?
Yeah. So here's the thing. You and I, are having this conversation today, and we've already come up with a list of at least 5 ideas of how we can make things a better place. So we, by default, are very good leaders, and we're doers. Women are doers. Historically, leaders at companies have been male, though, and however, and there's still males at the senior ranks. There's only, as an example, in the UK, there's only like 5 FTSE 100 CEOs right now, as an example, and that's not at all anywhere near 50%, as we know. So the fact is that there are a lot more men out there. The men have made the rules. There is a certain way they're used to in terms of leadership, hearing things, doing things. So when a woman comes along who is very competent at what she does, very effective, has excellent ideas, you're not throwing the traditional CEO headline into an off-whack a little bit, and they're not used to that. So we're very, very good as leaders. What we're trying to do now is say we can be ourselves, not change the mold and lead in a different way, lead as we do, and then show that this is actually a better style of management and leadership. You still have to lead with empathy, compassion, make people feel that sense of belonging, be very, not just diverse, but very inclusive as a leader. Make sure you have a high decency quotient as a leader. These are how you can be successful as a leader in terms of making numbers and making things happen. We just have to enact these ideas and go for it. Coming up with these ideas is one thing, enacting it is another.
We saw during the crisis the way that was the crisis managed, and what's your take about that, to see New Zealand, Germany leading the way for to go out from the pandemic?
I think it's absolutely fantastic what they're doing. We just have to remember that each country is different, and unfortunately, even though they did amazing things, I know that different countries like to do things their own ways. What everybody should do, however, is take a step back and know it's not a competition. You're supposed to learn from others, admire what they're doing. Things are going right, things aren't going so well. Look at what is going well and see if you can tweak your own policies a little bit without thinking, oh my goodness, I have to do it only my way because this is my country, this is the way I do things. Unfortunately, we all a little bit have that sense of entitlement, all of us in our different countries and whatnots, all of the leaders out there. If that came down a little bit, things would really, really a different place right now.
On a less encouraging point, the rates and statistics in terms of divorces, intolerance towards women are just really concerning and somehow dramatic. And the UN for Women in Support was underlying that. Yesterday I saw a statistic that was almost over 50% of women that got hurt deeply during the crisis. What do you think about that?
Unfortunately, there are 2 ways of the crisis right now, and women and children actually were the worst hit in this crisis. But that doesn't mean this wasn't going on before. What the crisis has done on the other side is brought these things to light. It's actually opening up what was happening behind closed doors before. People are speaking out more with the help of social media, the good and the bad. One thing that has come out of that is people are speaking up more and their voices are now getting heard more. Whereas before, similar things were also going on behind closed doors. Now we're starting to know about it. So it's very bad, it's awful. It's giving us the opportunity to think, this is what happens, what can we do in our part to help people? Now, if people see somebody not feeling themselves or a situation going on, they're more likely to ask them on the street, hey, is everything okay? Can I help? Before, the whole mentality was, it's just, mind your own business and move on. So it's almost opening up all of us to be a bit more compassionate in different ways. You don't know who's in need. You don't know what something you can do and say to someone that can actually help them and change their lives for the better.
That's really great and encouraging. I think that what's missing right now is about gratitude, tolerance. I think that these are the basics, the very basics that we need to teach to our kids, and also the responsibility of the schools and the institutions that have to englobe all these principles, because I think that's lacking and dramatically missing. I mean, we need to empower on one side the girls, but we need also to teach the boys what they have to do. What would you say as a mother to your children? Unfortunately, you have a boy and a girl, and that's fantastic. Is there a difference in as a parent in teaching them or encouraging them in life?
So here's the thing: as a parent, one thing that I used to notice when they were very young, and I still take them to the playground, but when they were very young, I would notice that when little girls would fall down, quite often a caregiver or a parent would just run after them and say, oh, are you okay? Are you okay? And the little boys would fall down and you would just, oh, it's fine, you're okay. You can just brush it off and go on. And I would see that behavior. I was not brought up that way. My dad would quite often take me to the playground and he would you get right back up again. You're going to be a tough cookie. And I think that's probably where I get a lot of my strength from as well. And I do the same with my kids as well. It doesn't matter if my daughter falls down or my son, unless they're actually seriously hurt, I'm not getting up. And they're going to get up, they're going to brush themselves off, and they're going to try again. If the boys and girls don't get up when they fall down, they never will. And that starts now. It's a lesson that starts now, that ultimately in life, you are going to be there to help yourself and find out what the challenges are. You have to try hard. You have to know what failure is. You can't do the monkey bars now. You won't if you cry about it. You have to keep practicing. Maybe in a day or two, you might be able to do another one. It might take you a week. It might take you a month. But then you should keep trying. You're never going to do any of them. So it's little things like that. And that journey, that messaging starts now. It starts in childhood. It starts the moment your children can walk. The messages that we give them by little things about how we react when they fall down, how we react when they pick up a toy in a shop. Do we automatically, when we're with our daughters, go to the dolls aisle? Do we automatically go to the science and Lego aisle with our sons when they're tiny little toddlers? It's things like that. Those messages are going into them. My kids, I would just have, my daughter was younger, so she would naturally get hand-me-downs from my son. So she was stuck with just toys of all sorts, so both of them like playing with all sorts of toys. They have their own affinities which they're developing for themselves, but I want them to develop that. My son, he doesn't like to pay for dolls. That's fine, but that's him saying that. I give him the choice. He doesn't want to do it. With my daughter, she loves playing with cars and trucks and she just loves rolling around in it. Absolutely fine. It's totally up to them what they pick. It's not going to come from me saying, oh, why don't you play with that one instead? I think that's better for you. No, because this is how they experiment, this is how they grow. And I think this, as a parent, is a very important message. Be aware of our own reaction, our own biases, and that's the only way that we can start to be more equal in the way our kids see things growing up as well.
I think we thank you. First of all, thank you. That's a fantastic answer and really complete. I think we as millennials have somehow changed the rules. Thanks to our parent that I suppose that you were born in the 70s, 80s. And at this moment, the technology was more developed. The world looked like a bit different. And I personally grew up in a very diverse mindset and very compassionate. And everything was really different from what they had, my parents, before. We had the chance to communicate and to understand how everything works in a faster way and see things differently. And I think that we almost inherited from the good and we left the bad. But now we have new challenges coming along, that things that we never heard about, like the crisis, like the pandemic, the whole challenges that we see occurring in terms of climate change, in terms of adopting the ESGs, for instance, and the different kind of governance. Do we have the responsibility to give it to our children to teach that there is such an amount of challenges that they have to prepare? Or do you think that we can leave them discover the next steps? What's your take on that?
Yeah, so that's an interesting one, because in our day, so in my day growing up, we had to deal with a lot of challenges ourselves. If we go back to my parents' generation, even more so, leaving a country that you grew up in and coming to a new country for the first time, facing so many issues and having very, very little, no means to start with, and making your life for the first time, that is true challenges. So even though I talk about challenges, my challenges don't even exist compared to the generation above me, my parents. Similarly, our children's generation have even it much better off. They have no idea compared to what we went through in our lives. And that's going on a lot. And they won't ever know unless we give them real life opportunities. In my parents' day, for example, in their 20s, they knew what it was like to have independence and earn for the first time and really make their keep, because they had to. That went on for a decade in my generation. My kids, and some of the slightly older kids' generations, it takes a lot longer. There's a lot more dependency on their parents for financial means. So I think it takes one or two ways. I personally think, don't sugarcoat life. People should live their lives. Yes, there is wisdom and there's understanding of things, but at the moment, everybody at school, certainly in the Western world, are learning about how love and kindness is what everyone's about. Be kind to everyone, be loving to everyone. Absolutely, these are 100% exactly how we should all be, but that isn't life. Teach people that this is how you should be to others, but others aren't like that. How are they going to deal with the first person that they meet that throws them a punch if they're not used to receiving one and getting up again? They just won't have any idea that people their age in different countries live different ways with different circumstances. So unfortunately, we can't travel right now because of the pandemic, but I traveled growing up. I would love to take my kids straight away on trips as soon as I can. At the moment, we're doing everything virtually to see other kids. They have pen pals in different countries right now, and I do that on purpose because we send each other pictures. It's snail mail. It takes time. Yes, we can send an email, but understand that our postal system might be a lot quicker than someone else's postal system. It might take a week for us to get it to them. It might take them 2 months to receive it in return. That's because of a postal system. Look at that. Oh, they live in a village. Well, they can't just go and get somebody to deliver. They have to walk themselves by foot, deliver it over there. Somebody may or may not pick it up from there. It may get stolen. It may not be. We don't know. There's so many other moving parts. We try to expose the kids to that. So I like showing them as much as possible what real life is about in the means that we have. And it's not always easy, but it's something that we as parents can do.
That's a super interesting answer. Back in time, I had an agency for something like 15 years in the digital industry. I felt that the market is so biased, and that's really related to what you said. It's about the approach and the awareness that back in time, the people didn't really know what's going on outside of their local space. And this is something that is really interesting because maybe thanks to the pandemic, somehow, and thanks to the connectivity we have right now, we can discover what's going on behind the scenes. And that's something that I would teach to my kids to better understand, to better seek for the answer, where they find themselves with people in front of them that have less. The kids from Africa to China to India are very aware about what's going on our side, but on our side, they don't necessarily know what's going on over there, which is something in terms of food, in terms of lack of water, that are very at the very beginning of their lives, they already know and they're already aware about what's going on there. And I think that this is the responsibility, also a big part of the job, of the daily job, because we're showing the way of strong women and leadership. I think that that's part of the reality that we have to face, also transmitting that to the girls, the next leaders. What would be your advice to them?
Yeah, I think leadership starts now. There's always been a misconception that leaders are all white men in their 60s, I don't know. It's always just an older generation. Leadership starts now. It starts at a young age. It starts when you feel empowered to feel independent enough and confident enough to make a choice and a decision that you can stand by. When you are compassionate enough to look after others around you at the same time. It can start, as kids in the classroom. For girls, I would say it's really important when they go into the years of adolescence to really take note then about their confidence. To me, confidence is what undermines all of this entire journey of empowerment, especially for women, for girls. And it starts really from a young age, but then research shows, I think there's a study that Deloitte did, that around the ages between 9 and 14, that's where girls for the first time start losing their confidence, because that's when they go through puberty. That's where their bodies start to change. So whereas they might be sitting like this, they might suddenly start to hunch over a little bit because they're starting to feel embarrassed and more body conscious, and they never used to do that. Hormones start to play a part in everything as well. So that's really a time to start giving these leadership hacks and techniques. This is where we really should be building on confidence, really empowering that voice of theirs. That yes, they may be feeling differently right now, but there's different ways of expressing yourself. It's not just words. It could be drawing, musical, whatever it is. These are all different ways of communicating, so they never lose that drive to hear their voice and knowing that their voice means something, and that needs to keep going and going. So whereas some, once they've gone through their early years in their 20s can really overcome that and start going into leadership roles, a lot of people don't. They're more likely to take a more complacent role. And in this new era, and this age where women are feeling more empowered, girls are still feeling more empowered, this is the time to really direct them to really, really sort of getting to know and respect and love themselves so much so that, it's themselves is the only barrier that stops them from going forward in the future.
That's awesome. That's really interesting. It reminds me a quote that a VC told me this week about how we as women behave towards life. On a 90 years living, we have men have a very stable living. We as women, we have a period of time when we get pregnant. That's the instability. And coming from a VC, a man, and he told me that several times. He told me maybe you're going to get pregnant 2, 3, 4 times, on an average, but that's instability. And that requires a lot of power and a proper mindset to get into a new mode, totally different from what we had before. And that's something that requires a lot of power and a lot of leadership. And we often forget underlying that because that's a change of status, obviously, to get that. And he mentioned even more that once you're a mother, the whole leadership that we didn't really realize during the puberty, as you mentioned, is going out. And that's the time for us to lead the way. And that's something...
I think that's the time when you start leadership starts early. It's those years, your adolescent years, where your views are starting to form for the first time. One thing to be careful of, though, this is the time to promote the leadership, but also it's a time, and you might remember this, I certainly remember it, when you're a certain age and you're feeling empowered for the first time, you feel like you're invincible. You feel like you know everything. The world is your oyster. You can be in a really risk-taking mode. You can do this, you can do that. It's your youth. So what we have to also be careful of is that having that right balance between using that voice, that conviction, but also knowing that you don't know when you don't know. And
right.
That is a really important lesson that starts early but continues forever in life until our old age, whatever it is, But it really starts early because that's where leadership is, having that knowledge and acceptance that there could be different ideas. Somebody else might have a different idea out there. It doesn't mean that yours is bad or you should give up, but acknowledge that there are other things out there and we are always evolving. Even the education system. By the time our kids have graduated, their education and the way they have taught is outdated. And that's real life. So we've got to teach them in a certain way that keeps them constantly learning and wanting to know more and more and more, so that when we think back in a full circle, going to the women, going into tech, that's what it's all about. When you talk about women going into trading, for example, it's the same thing. I remember another playground example, Yale. that just observing kids on the playground, I see quite often the boys, they play these sort of cards, trump cards or something, where they sort of say, oh, what do you have, what do you have? And initially, some of the girls get involved in that as well, but then they have to go and buy these packs of cards at home to bring to school. Quite often, the girls' parents don't buy them for the girls. They go, well, why do you need that for? What's that got to do with anything? And they don't get it, so they miss out on these games. These games is the early first steps of how trading starts, how negotiating starts, how risk-taking starts for the first time. By limiting that, you're limiting them.
You're increasing the bias.
Right, but they didn't know. Nobody realized it. No one's even had that conversation that is a type of bias. They just think, well, what are they going to need that for? Rather than, oh, wow, this is what it could do in the future, you know. What happens later on is that these girls grow up, and then later on at school, at college, they get taught these things. Whereas naturally, some of the boys, just because of the games they're playing on the playground, that's where it starts. They've already been exposed to certain language and tips and trainings. They're not as scared of failing or taking risks because they've already done that. You know, you see girls playing tag on the playground when they're really young, and then they stop doing that after a while, and then puberty starts off and they don't really do that as much. So it's things like that. That is part of risk taking. That's part of losing. You get tagged, you've lost in a way, right? So
it's a missing opportunity, a huge opportunity, and a huge responsibility that is again, it comes from home and bad education, and that's really realistically honest. One last question: what do we need to get the seat at the table?
You got to have your inner confidence, number one. You got to know your stuff, and it's the way you present yourself. So when people are talking about seat at the table, there's many ways around it. One is that you could find a career champion, somebody that could help you open that door in the first place. But once that door is open, to keep that seat at the table is a very different thing. That is your own hard work and personal strength that's going to get you there. To get that seat at the table, though, you need to be concise in the way you communicate as well. A lot of the work I do, a lot of the coaching I do is about concise communications and the art of negotiation. So you might have heard this phrase again as an example, mansplaining. It's a phrase that is sometimes used in meetings where a female colleague comes in and she explains something to her boss, and a male colleague comes in straight away, paraphrases that, and then gets the credit for the idea. So that in itself, that is a technique of how things are done. Rather than think, oh, why is that always happening? Why do the guys always do that? Think about how are they communicating, why that happens. Keep it short and sweet. If somebody wants to ask you a question later on and follow up, that's fine. But you don't give away everything when you go in to just give a quick summary description. You need to practice that elevator description, like the elevator pitch. You practice that when you're about to present. Always less is more. So it's the art of the communications, how to negotiate. That's ultimately what's going to help us not just get that seat at the table, but remain and have eventually the head seat at that table.
Wow, what a fantastic way to end this interview. Wow, I'm impressed. Thank you so much, Rita. I had a great time, and I hope you too. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you as well. Appreciate this. I love the work you're doing. As soon as you mentioned it, and I love what you're doing. So if you need any help, think tank, brainstorming on anything else, just please reach out.
I
this
will.
is the stuff that drives me. I'm passionate about it. I love it. So just use me as a resource.